I was fired to save $400. My revenge cost them $42 million. I spent 47 years old in this building, raising 2 children and 4 grandchildren, working shifts and drinking black coffee. And on a rainy Thursday, they handed me a file with my name misspelled on the tag. Cost cutting, the girl from HR said. The plant manager stood next to her, his eyes on the floor, his thumbs on his phone. I could still smell the motor oil on my hands. 68 is not an age, I said evenly. You asked me to train a new line last month? We're restructuring, he said, finally looking up. If we fire you now, we'll avoid a premium hike. Only $400 a month. The key to my locker pressed like a crescent into my palm. Behind them, on the break room table, someone had left a stale birthday cake from the previous party. The knife was still covered in frosting, tilted as if the party had ended without us. I thought of the girls I'd mentored, the boys I'd sent home to sober up, the night the conveyor belt jammed and I'd crawled underneath with a flashlight because the boss was afraid of sparks. I thought of them calling me Mommy Meg when their lives were falling apart. How could the men I'd taught how to work reduce me to a coupon line? Sign the severance package, HR said softly, sliding the papers toward me. That's generous. I opened the folder. A non-disclosure agreement, a waiver, basically an admission that I would go quietly. I smiled. They didn't know about the attendance logs I kept when young people showed up late and blamed traffic, the emails I wrote about being too rigid to lead the robotics upgrade, the message from the boss saying may kick her out before her start date. They didn't know that my granddaughter showed me how to record on a phone, or that my neighbor's daughter is an employment lawyer who plays cards with me on Wednesdays. They had no idea that I had been preparing for this day since the first time I was called honey in a meeting and my numbers were written down without a name. I capped the pen they'd offered and slid the folder back. I'll take this home, I said. I read slowly when I'm being underestimated. The plant manager's throat bobbed. The HR girl kept smiling, but her knuckles went white. 68 isn't old when your hands still know a bolt by feel and your ears can hear a bearing begging for oil from halfway across the floor. I was 21 when I first walked into that plant, hair tucked under a scarf, boots 2 sizes too big, because I'd taken my husband's by mistake in the dawn rush. Back then, the bay doors stood open all summer and the roof leaked in winter, so we kept 5-gallon buckets by the tool crib and joked we were divers. We made parts that kept other things alive, pumps, housings, brackets, stable work, honest, and it taught me everything about people. Parts either fit or they didn't. People pretended otherwise. The first manager who knew my name was Jim. He shook hands like it mattered and said my line had the cleanest tools he'd ever seen. He retired with a gold watch and a backyard big enough for grandchildren to get lost in. The second manager, a few years after that, was Pete, who kept a cot in his office during the big contract in 1998. He called me in twice to settle disputes because he said I had a referee's eyes. We had our rhythms, late August shutdowns, pizza when the quarterly numbers hit, the quiet hum late at night when the radio was the only voice. I brought up 2 kids on that rhythm. When my daughter left nursing school for a year to help with her baby, my manager adjusted my shift so I could be home mornings. When my son's marriage blew up, the plant covered a week. He called in and told me to take him fishing. And we were a place that made room for human mess. Then came the new ownership. It didn't feel like a hurricane at first, just a change of wind. Some silver-named private group sent a letter calling us a legacy asset with potential for optimization. We got new safety posters, new slogans, and a new plant manager named Colton who introduced himself without shaking hands. He liked to say operational discipline and cost curves, and he wore the same narrow tie every day, like a lanyard they forgot to print a name for. He brought a younger crew with clean resumes and not enough scars. HR went from Helen, who kept peppermint in her desk and knew every birthday, to a suite of people in matching blazers who said policy the way a priest says amen. The first layoff list slipped onto the bulletin board just before Thanksgiving. They called it realignment and said it was about skills. Funny how skills seem to evaporate with age. Men who could strip a gearbox blindfolded were reclassified as redundant. Women who could run 3 presses during shutdown were suddenly misaligned to future needs. I started keeping a notebook on my break. A habit from raising babies and budgets. Name, date, department, reason given. On the back flaps, I jotted the truth. Bad knee from ladder fall last year, gone a week to care for his mother, turned down overtime on Sundays for church. Patterns are like rust. You don't see them until they spread. I didn't think of myself as a target, not at first. I ran the training program for the new robotic cells because none of the boys could coax the arms into hitting plus or minus 0.001 every time. "You've got old fingers," one of them said, trying to flatter. I laughed. We made a good team, my patience and their speed. I stayed late, built the binders, labeled the trays, called out suppliers when their tolerances floated. We got the line purring after months of sputter. That was the month Colton called me into a meeting and asked me to explain our scrap rate to the board on a video screen. "Keep it simple," he said, leaning back. "They're not shop people." I did. They applauded. Afterward, Colton clapped my shoulder like a coach. "You're a treasure," he said. The month after that, he changed my shift to nights and took the teaching stipend without telling me. "Budget constraints?" HR said when I asked. "I'll be fine," I told myself. I'd been fine before. The second layoff list came midsummer, 3 names in their 50s, 2 weeks later, 2 more. That was when I saw the email left open on a lead screen while he went to get coffee. "Push her out before her vesting date." Not about me. The subject line said operations, but someone used that phrase like a calendar reminder. I wrote it in my notebook and underlined it twice. I started printing things after hours, nothing dramatic. Training schedules, shift change memos, a directive about attendance anomalies that applied only to first shift workers over 60. I kept them in a manila folder behind the spare gloves in my locker, then later moved them to the tin bread box under my sink. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I was prepared. It was a small thing that tipped me. A boy named Travis, 22 and proud of his beard, took my tool cart without asking. He apologized, red-faced, and joked he thought I wouldn't need it soon. "They're talking," he said, "about the older crew." He made a face I recognized from my grandson when he realizes the joke isn't funny. I squeezed his arm and told him to get back to work. Then I went to the time clock where the cameras couldn't reach and took a photograph of the schedule that had replaced mine with the name of a trainee I had taught how to reset the arm only last week. I'm not a genius. I am patient. The day they handed me the severance folder, I took their pen, smiled, and asked for a paper copy to read at home. HR smiled like we were friends. Colton didn't meet my eyes. He said the quiet part out loud, $400 a month in premiums. I could hear the calculation. What is a lifetime of work worth against a line in a spreadsheet? Less than a parking space. I drove home with steady hands and put the folder beside my bread box. Then I called Esther next door and asked if her daughter, the employment attorney, still came on Wednesdays for cards. She did. "Sweetheart," Esther said, "I've been waiting for this call." Her daughter's name was Noelle. Mid-40s, quick, with that tone you hear in triage nurses and air traffic controllers. We sat at my kitchen table with tea and the manila folder while the late sun laid lines across the floor. Noelle read silently for a long time. Then she pointed to a clause. "They want you to waive everything," she said. "Age discrimination, ERISA interference, retaliation, the whole lot. The NDA is ridiculous." "They said it was generous," I said. "Only to themselves," Noelle said. "The timing is suspicious, right before your vesting anniversary. That alone is a red flag, but I want more than flags. Do you have anything written, any emails?" I slid the bread box toward her. When she opened it and saw the neatly stacked printouts, the notebook with names and dates, the photograph of the whiteboard with my shift replaced, and a note that said phase out training role, she smiled without showing teeth. "I'll take copies," she said, "and I'll bring in a colleague who knows ERISA, like scripture." "What about my friends?" I asked. "The ones they let go last year?" I wrote down what they told me. "We'll talk to them," she said, "but remember, this is your mud. We build from your facts. Are you ready for a fight? It isn't quick." I looked at my hands, Scar at the base of the thumb from a dropped bracket in '92. Burn on the forearm from the heat tunnel back when the guard jammed. These hands had fed babies, fixed faucets, and held dying friends' fingers. What was left to be afraid of? I've been ready since the day they started calling me sweetheart, I said. And we filed an EEOC charge first because that's how you open the gate. While it sat, we gathered. Noelle conducted interviews, and I listened. Men who swore they didn't need anyone started telling me they couldn't sleep. Women who always carried extra shifts cried in my living room over coffee, whispering like the walls had ears. They told me I was mentoring out my job, one said. Another had a text meant for someone else that read, "She gets the hint by fall, right?" We kept going. Not everything stayed clean. One afternoon, a sedan with tinted windows sat on my block too long, and a man from HR stood behind me in line at the grocery store and said loudly into his phone, "Some people are so ungrateful." Colton sent me a certified letter reminding me of the confidentiality policy. I sent it to Noelle, who sent a response citing the whistleblower protections I had read 3 times to make sure I understood. The next week, our water in the break room tasted like metal because maintenance deferred filter changes as a non-essential cost. It didn't matter to me anymore. I had packed my locker already. Photos in a shoebox, my own wrenches in a cloth roll, the note my granddaughter had left tucked behind the magnet. "You are brave." Depositions are a strange theater. You sit at a table under fluorescent lights like any other conference room, but every breath counts. Noelle sat at my left, her colleague at my right. Across from us, the company's counsel shuffled papers and tried not to look annoyed. The court reporter's nails clicked softly. "State your name for the record," counsel said. I did. "You worked for the company from June 1977 to April 2024. Your highest level of education?" "High school with apprenticeships, certifications on the Makino, Fanuc, Kuka, OSH, A30. He blinked. "Did anyone ever tell you your performance was unsatisfactory?" "No," I said. "I have my reviews. Our records show attendance issues." I leaned forward. "I have my time cards," I said. "Would you like copies?" Noelle slid a packet across the table. Counsel skimmed and his mouth flattened. We watched him find the note written by my supervisor last December. "Thank God for M. She's the only one who can get C-Cell to run on cold starts." He tried a different angle. "Did you ever say you wanted to retire?" "I said the opposite," I answered. "I said I would train the robotics upgrade and then we would talk." "What did management say?" "That I should consider making room for younger talent," I said, "and that costs were rising." He asked me about the texts, the emails, the whisper in the break room. He asked me whether I might have misunderstood. I asked him how many things a person has to misunderstand before the pattern becomes a plan. I wasn't rude. I was precise. That's what the job trains into you. The company dumped emails to satisfy discovery. Thousands of them. Noelle's team ran searches. At first, nothing obvious. Then a phrase popped, Project Evergreen. It wasn't in HR files. It was in finance summaries and board decks, the ones with friendly graphics. Reduce average workforce age to 38 over 3 years. Capture benefit savings through early exits. Mitigate union risk by focusing on non-critical legacy roles first. Each bullet was a neat little crime wearing a consulting suit. Noelle looked at me and said, "This is gold." I shook my head. "It's rust," I said. "They just painted over it." Project Evergreen would have been enough to make a case, but the world likes to show you the rot is deeper. I already knew quality had slipped. You can hear it before you see it, a stutter that doesn't belong, a tool that sings when it cuts because it's fighting. During a winter shift, months before they tried to retire me, I'd found pallets of parts with stamps out of order. The inspector, new nervous, had run his sign-off before the final torque check to hit his quota. He planned to go back, he forgot. I flagged them and called my lead. He waved me down. "Ship it," he said. "We'll catch it in the next run." I stood there for a full minute, feeling the air change. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. Now, in Discovery, we found emails from quality to operations. Warning of federal tolerance violations on a batch that went to a defense contractor's pumps. Not one memo had gone to the government client. Internal remediation sufficient, someone had typed. A month later, Ops celebrated a bonus for on-time delivery. My stomach went cold. We were no longer talking about numbers on a board. We were talking about engines that couldn't fail and the people who trusted us to tell the truth. Do you want to go there? Noelle asked carefully. This is bigger than wrongful termination. I thought of men and women in uniforms standing on tarmac under sharp sun. I thought of the boy I'd trained last summer who liked to race motorcycles and whose girl had freckles like spilled cinnamon. I thought of my husband, gone now, who had always told the truth even when it cost him a weekend. Yes, I said. Noelle brought in a friend who specialized in whistleblower cases. He wore scuffed shoes and spoke softly. He explained the federal statute in words I could write in my notebook. If a company takes government money and lies to get it, the government can get their money back and then some. The person who tells on them gets a share. It will be hard, he said. They will call you a disgruntled employee. They will dig into your life. They already have, I said. They didn't find much. We filed the quitam under seal. That's how it works. You whisper to the government and wait while they decide whether to take the case. Waiting is its own war. I kept my routine. I walked in the mornings, cooked for church on Thursdays, watched the night news with the sound low. People in the grocery store asked if I was excited for retirement. I smiled and said I was learning to sit on my hands. At night, I lay awake, counting pallets in my head, seeing red stamps on silver metal. Then the government called. A woman from the U.S. Attorney's Office asked me to tell her about torque checks. She asked me about the run code that shows whether a piece has passed final inspection. She asked me about the day my lead said ship it, and about my email to him that night, which read, "We need to stop this." She asked me whether I had a copy. I did. I had sent it from my own account so I could sleep. She listened. She asked to speak to my friends. She took our files and said, "Do not discuss this beyond your counsel." I didn't. I waited. The company knew something was happening because their lawyers' emails went from smug to barking. Colton started sending group messages about loyalty and outside agitators. HR made a new policy about talking to the press, even though no one wanted to. Someone left a dead spider on my windshield. Childish as a high school prank. I ignored it. The U.S. Attorney's Office returned a month later with questions they could only ask if they had already looked in places we couldn't. There was a bonus pool? The woman asked. Tied to on-time delivery? There was, she nodded. Thank you, she said. We'll be back. They gave me a code name in their files. I wrote it on a slip of paper and tucked it under the sugar canister like it was a relic. I told no one, not even Esther, whose ears were the safest harbor in town. On the employment case side, our mediation came and went like a thunderstorm that refuses to rain. The company offered me a settlement that would have covered a small car and 6 months of groceries. Think of your time, their lawyer said kindly. Your age. I thought of my time, counted in night shifts and birthdays missed. I thought of my age, which taught me to hold still while men talk themselves into mistakes. No, I said. We'll see you in court. Trial felt like standing under lights too bright for your eyes. People think it's fireworks, it's paperwork and patience with heat. But there are moments. The first was when our counsel put up a slide summarizing Project Evergreen. The boardroom bullet points looked obscene under the courthouse seal. The jury watched with faces that didn't blink. I watched them see what we had seen. My turn on the stand came that afternoon. I wore the same navy dress I wore to my granddaughter's piano recital and my work boots. The judge glanced down at them and smiled a little. Maybe he had a grandmother with work boots, too. What did they tell you when they let you go? Noelle asked. They said it saved $400 a month, I answered. How did that make you feel? Like I was a coupon, I said, and the jury's shoulders stiffened. Why didn't you just retire? I looked out across the room and saw Travis in the back row, hat in hands. I saw my daughter, nurse's scrubs, under a cardigan. I saw the HR girl, the one who smoothed her skirt, sitting alone. Because I wasn't done, I said. Because I had promised to finish what I started. Because they asked me to train people and then told me I took up space. The company's lawyer tried to trip me with details. "Isn't it true you missed a shift in February?" he asked. "My husband had a stroke," I said. "I called in and brought a note. It's in the file. Isn't it true you sent an email critical of management?" "It is," I said. "I was critical of lying." "Opinion," he said. "Fact," I said, and the judge didn't scold me, though he could have. They called Colton. He wore a different tie at last, but it didn't change his eyes. He talked about market conditions. He nodded solemnly about costs. He said he would have kept me if only he could. Noelle slid a blown-up copy of an email in front of him. "What is Project Evergreen?" she asked. "A brainstorming initiative," he said. She read the bullets one by one, then the line at the bottom. "Achieve reductions without legal exposure." He swallowed. Did you receive a bonus for achieving these reductions?" she asked. He looked at his counsel. "Yes." "How much?" $75,000, he said, so softly the court reporter asked him to repeat it. "Thank you," Noelle said. The HR girl cried on the stand. I didn't enjoy it. She was young. She read scripts someone handed her and believed policy was a promise. "We thought we were protecting her," she said. We believed she was tired." I believed she believed that. The law cares about evidence. My empathy could wait. The jury returned with a number that made the room go very quiet. $12 million for me, as if my name could carry that much money without breaking. Compensatory, punitive, fees folded on top, like the bow they never gave me on a retirement cake. The foreman, a woman with hands like mine, did not look at the company table when she read it. She looked at me like we'd just finished building a shed in a storm. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped. The government unsealed the quitom and announced a settlement with the company over the falsified inspection stamps and the tolerance failures on parts shipped to the defense contractor. They called it a message. The company called it an opportunity to move forward. I read the number twice because numbers like that don't fit in your mouth without cracking. $173 million. They had to repay the government the dollars and then some. My share as relator was less than a fifth, but more than I'd made in 4.5 decades, around $30 million. I sat at my kitchen table and put my head in my hands and wept, not because of money, which solves some things and complicates others, but because truth, once in a rare while, actually stands up in public and stretches to its full height. People asked whether I felt vindicated. I felt tired. It takes more energy to hold your ground than to sprint. Reporters called. I didn't answer. A woman from the paper left a note with a drawing of a wrench at the bottom. I called her back and told her she could say I was grateful for my community and my counsel and that I believed in work that doesn't hide. Colton resigned to spend more time with his family. The board put out a statement about new values and compliance frameworks. They hired back 3 of the workers they'd let go and called it reconciliation. Maybe it was math. My lawyer suggested I move, change my number. I kept my house. I painted the porch rail that had flaked through 3 winters. I fixed the sticking window in the back bedroom. I set aside trusts for my grandchildren with strict notes about education and not a penny for nonsense. I created a fund at the community college for people over 50 who want to learn new machines or new codes because the world keeps changing and we can too. I didn't start a foundation. I started a tool library out of the church basement so someone can borrow a torque wrench without pretending it's a luxury. A week after the verdict, I walked past the plant. The air smelled the same: hot metal, oil, the faint sweetness of cardboard pallets. A man stood outside smoking. He looked young from a distance. Then closer I saw he had the soft eyes of someone who has buried people. He nodded. "You did right," he said. "My dad worked there 20 years. They told him he was slow." He spat in the gutter and smiled without humor. "Not slow now, are they?" I thought of the HR girl. I thought of Colton and his tie. I thought of Jim with the gold watch and the bucket under the leak. I thought of my husband asking me if I could make the gravy thicker. and my baby granddaughter with her fists curled like commas. People can do better, I said. Sometimes they need to be told. On Sundays, I still cook for church. Last week, I ran into Travis, the boy who took my cart at the grocery store. He had a baby strapped to his chest. I got out, he said, doing HVAC now, using my hands. He shifted the diaper bag and realized who he was talking to. His face went red. I'm sorry, he said, blurting. For that day, for everything dumb I said. You were learning, I told him. You still are. He looked at me like I'd handed him a second chance wrapped in butcher paper. You coming to the reunion? He asked. The old crew had planned a barbecue at the park, potluck, and stories. I said I would bring my potato salad. He nodded eagerly and told me his mother loved that salad. The baby woke and fussed. He jiggled her expertly. I'm teaching her to be stubborn, he said. Like you. Stubborn is another word for steady, I said. What does revenge feel like when you're a grandmother who has more recipes than grudges? It feels like putting a level on a shelf and seeing the bubble finally settle between the lines. Not gloating, not shouting, balance. The men who turned me into a cost cut were taught the price of lying. The women who cried at my table got calls from lawyers with news. The government got its money back with interest. The plant will make better parts because someone is watching. It isn't perfect. It is better than it was the day they handed me a severance folder with a pen. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m. to the phantom sound of a conveyor starting up. Old habits. I lie there with my hands on my chest and ask the quiet questions that used to keep me sharp. Where is the play in the joint? What's the tolerance we can live with? How do we stop what's failing without breaking what works? And then I ask the newest one, how did we let ourselves believe that older people are a cost instead of an asset? The answer is always the same, because it's easier to measure dollars than value. But easy doesn't last. Work does. The morning after the settlement announcement, my porch was covered in roses. No card. Neighbors, I guessed, or maybe a line worker who didn't want his boss to see him being kind. I put them in every jar I had, even the pickle one with the chipped rim. The house smelled like a wedding. Esther came over with coffee cake, and we sat, two old women who have outlived plenty of storms, and watched a sparrow try to steal a petal. You going to buy a fancy car? She teased. I'm going to buy a new wrench, I said, and maybe a freezer for all the casseroles people will bring me now that they think I'm delicate. We laughed until we cried, because the same feeling can be both. I went back to the courtroom once after everything to sit on a bench and empty the past out of the room like you open windows after frying fish. The clerk recognized me and nodded me toward the front. I sat where I had sat before and imagined all the other people who had told their truths here. Some had won, some had not. I ran my finger along the wood rail. It was smooth from being touched by people who wanted to hold on. If you were to ask me what I kept and what I let go, I'd say I kept my name. I let go of the need to be liked by people who had already decided a version of me was easier to manage. I kept my toolbox and the habit of labeling things. I let go of the urge to fix every machine because some people are committed to being broken until a judge explains otherwise. I kept my patience. I let go of their pen. When the check came, the one with more zeros than I have fingers, I signed my name the same way I signed time cards and field trip forms. Firm, legible, mine. Then I went to the bank and opened accounts with limits and rules, and I promised to myself to sleep every night like a person who had done what she could. Sometimes strangers stop me and ask how to start. Not lawsuits, life. How do you pick yourself up when they reduce you to a line item? I tell them this. You start small, write it down, one date, one name, one sentence. Patterns will tell the story if you let them. And when the day comes and someone slides a paper across a table and says, it's nothing personal, you remember everything personal you've given, and you lift your chin and you say, I read slowly when I'm being underestimated. Then you go home and you open your bread box and you take out the truth. And if you're lucky, if you're stubborn in the way that saves lives, the truth will do the rest. In my case, it cost them $42 million. It bought me back my time, and it left me with one last job I intend to do well. Teach every woman my age to be as patient and as prepared as a person with nothing left to prove. That's the beginning and the end of it. But if you were to stick around on a Tuesday afternoon, you might find me at a metal table at the community college with three women my age and one man who has finally admitted he needs reading glasses. We practice measuring tolerances on a training jig a kid from the robotics club welded for us. We compare notes. We learn to program the arm so it hits plus or minus 0.001 every time because that's what precision demands. We drink coffee from cups that taste faintly of soap. We laugh. We argue over whether a jig can be pretty. Someone plays a radio low. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the sound a life makes when it clicks into place and holds.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.